Seren's hands trembled beneath the weight of accusations hoarse with venom, thrown like poisoned arrows from lips she once called friends. The courtyard of the capital was suffocating, crowded with faces twisted in outrage and disbelief, and her own heart pounded in a rhythm, jagged as the faint scar tracing from her left cheek down toward her jawline. For months, she had woven herself into the tapestry of the court, quiet, careful, nearly invisible save for those piercing emerald eyes that missed nothing. Yet here she stood, the scent of treachery heavy in the air, the whispers of traitor and spy swirling around her like a wicked storm. "I never betrayed you," Seren's voice cracked, raw with desperation. But the crowd's roar swallowed her truth. She looked to those she trusted most, men and women whose smiles had once been warm, whose hands had steadied hers in the darkest nights, and now their faces were swords, their eyes colder than the steel of the guards pressing in. Her heart shattered beneath the weight of their betrayal, each breath ragged, each step backward an exile from the past she had fought so hard to build. A crash echoed as a heavy boot struck a wooden table near her, the slap resonating with menace. Enough. The evidence is clear. Seren of the East Wing conspired against the crown. She will answer for her treason. The messenger's voice was cold, authoritative, unyielding. Her world blurred beyond the tear-streaked faces, the suffocating press of bodies. She fought the urge to scream, to fight, to plead, but the bitter realization settled like stone inside her ribs. She was alone. She turned, weaving through the crowd with urgent steps, the whispers clawing behind her like shadows, until the stifling city gave way to the outer roads, dust swirling in the harsh wind that carried her away from everything familiar. Alone, bruised and fractured, Seren traveled through twisted paths beneath bruised skies, each step heavier than the last. Her silken chestnut hair, streaked now with unbidden silver strands that no mirror had warned her of, battered by the chill wind, tangled and unkempt. The faint scar on her cheek throbbed, a physical echo of the wounds unseen. Her lithe frame bent with exhaustion, but she forced herself forward, driven by some stubborn ember of survival that flickered weakly, refusing to die. The village she reached was a place forgotten by peace, its wooden huts ramshackle, smoke rising in anxious spirals, the cries of children swallowed beneath the low murmur of preparation. The scent of damp earth mixed with desperation, the fields, once fertile, now scarred by the footprints of war. Soldiers moved briskly, tents stretching across the hills like a grim canvas of impending siege. This was no refuge but a frontier on the edge of ruin. As she crossed into the war camp, wary eyes followed her every step. Mothers pulled children close. Merchants hurried beneath the long shadows of blackened clouds gathering overhead. Somewhere distant, the low howl of war horns echoed, a dirge for a peace that seemed ever more fragile. Her breath caught when she saw him. King Kalen stood apart from the others, a solitary mountain amid the chaos. Raven, black hair, slicked back to reveal a sharp jawline and storm-grey eyes that seemed to crackle with unspoken fury. His broad, muscular frame radiated power, yet there was a strange stillness about him, a distance that set him apart even here, amid the teeming mass of soldiers and villagers. Watching him was like witnessing the eye of a storm, calm, terrifying, and utterly alone. The jagged burn mark scar running across his right hand caught the fading light, a silent testament to battles fought, not only against enemies, but against something far deeper. Rumors whispered in hushed tones. The Alpha King was cursed, touched by darkness that forbade him the warmth of human contact. His solitude was a sentence written before this war, before the lands burned and bled beneath the drumbeats of battle. Seren refrained from approaching. She was brittle, her spirit frayed, unwilling to be caught in the gaze of this distant monarch. Yet fate, as it often does, had its own design. The camp buzzed with war's urgency, men sharpening blades, women tending to the wounded, young boys clutching wooden swords, eyes bright with dreams of glory or shadows of fear. Amid them, Seren moved instinctively toward a cluster of injured villagers, haunted by the reminder that her past had been torn apart by the very court she served, but her future now tethered to this fragile line between survival and destruction. She knelt to the ground, palms covered in grime, fingers trembling as she wrapped torn linen around a gash pulsing with fresh blood. One of the men groaned, pain etching his features deep, but he squeezed her hand, in silent thanks, a fragile bond forming beneath the chaos. From the edge of the camp, a low, guttural growl cut through the steady drone of preparation. A massive wolf emerged from the shadows, its coat as black as the night, and eyes that glimmered with primal intelligence. The beast moved with a haunting grace, muscles rippling beneath thick fur, prowling the perimeter like a guardian forged by nightmare and loyalty. Soldiers shivered under its gaze, stepping back as if the presence could unravel the fragile veil of their courage. Seren froze, heart pounding, caught between fear and fascination. A creature as fierce as this was no stranger to pain or solitude. She met the wolf's amber eyes with her own sharp, emerald stare, not with submission, but with a mutual recognition of brokenness. The Alpha King followed behind, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that barely masked something worn thin beneath centuries of solitude, something desperate and fiercely protective. Yet when he stepped forward, inching closer, his cursed nature betrayed him. The air quivered, charged with a strange resistance, a barrier unseen but unyielding that kept his massive hands from reaching her. His breath hitched, shadowed pain folding his lips. Instead of retreating, the wolf shifted, growling low in defiance as it settled by Seren's side, curling protectively around her lithe form. The beast's dark eyes flicked to Kaelin, a silent warning, an unspoken challenge. It was as if the animal sensed a link, a thread entwining their fates, and refused to let Seren be claimed or lost. She was no longer alone, not when the beast's feral vigil kept the darkness at bay. "She won't leave," Kaelin's voice rumbled, low and rough, a sound both commanding and uncertain. The wolf's ears twitched, tail flicking once in quiet stubbornness as if answering the Alpha King. Seren glanced up, her breath catching in her throat at the unusual tableau. A cursed king, a fierce beast, and a fractured woman woven awkwardly into the strands of survival. Kaelin's grey eyes softened, for the briefest moment, haunted by a loneliness that no army could conquer. His voice dropped to a near whisper, meant more for himself than anyone else. "Neither will I." Around them, the war camp held its breath, caught between fear and hope as the slow burn of connection flickered beneath the weight of curses and scars. And in that fragile ember of defiance, the first threads of something impossible, something raw and unyielding, began to take hold. The camp was an unforgiving crucible of whispered rumors and consecrated fears. Word spread with rapid and reckless breath. Seren's cursed blood might hold the key to breaking the Alpha King's own curse. It was a theory born from desperation and ancient superstition, murmured by wary soldiers whose eyes flicked to her with suspicion and reluctant awe. For all her defiance and strength, she found herself suddenly misunderstood all over again, transformed into something more, something both coveted and feared. Seren caught snatches of hushed conversations as she moved through the rough camp. If her blood can break his curse, the king will be free. But what does that mean for her? A soldier murmured sharply as she passed. Another voice, lower and more urgent, replied, "They say the curse twisted her lineage at birth. If that's true, she's no ordinary woman, not by any measure. It's why the wolf guards her like his own." Her heart clenched fiercely every time her name parted lips, like a secret hymn of hope or a curse of its own. She wanted to deny it, to push back against the weight of those expectations that came draped in superstition and fear. But a strange, inexplicable energy had started to rise within her whenever she was near Kaelin, a silent pulse that thrummed beneath her skin and set her blood alight in ways she couldn't yet understand. It was not power she sought or wanted. It was survival. But the power, whether a gift or a curse, had begun to unravel the fragile limits she thought she had. Sometimes when Kaelin was close, the air shimmered faintly, like the world bent just slightly towards something otherworldly. His presence, magnetic yet distant, seemed to pull strands of latent strength from the edges of her consciousness. It was subtle, but undeniable, and it unsettled the soldiers, who saw it with unblinking eyes sharpened by fear and superstition. Seren's emerald gaze held more than defiance on those long nights when she stood close enough to catch the gust of cold that always followed Kaelin's storm-grey eyes. It was as if their cursed destinies had woven the edge of a new story, fragile and trembling, but impossible to ignore. "The girl's strength grows each day," an officer remarked quietly to his comrade one evening as Seren passed. "The king's interest deepens. You can see it in his eyes, like he's searching for something we don't yet understand. Or maybe she's the key to his curse after all." The comrade replied, "If her blood can lift the shadow, what will that cost her?" Seren's stride faltered for just a heartbeat in the dusty evening. She wanted to reject the idea with every fibre of her being. She was no pawn, no sacrifice for an ancient spell. But the pulse deep within her remained a rhythm that whispered against the silence of her isolation. It was a reminder that her fate had tangled irrevocably with Kaelin's, locked in shadows and scars, steel and salt. Night after night, she sat by the firelight that flickered in the war camp, stealing moments where Kaelin was near enough for that faint electric hum to stir the air. Neither spoke of it. Neither acknowledged the growing force that bound them just beyond the veil of fear and curses. But it was there, undeniable and unrelenting. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. A sudden clang of horns shattered the fragile calm of the camp in the midnight hour. Seren felt the tremor of panic before the voices erupted. Shouts, orders, the rush of feet pounding against the dirt. The enemy was upon them with brutal swiftness, a surprise attack that tore through the quiet like a blade. She moved instinctively, nerves sharp and breath ragged. The wolf, the dark, fierce sentinel, was already snarling as soldiers scrambled to defend the camp. Kaelin appeared beside her like a shadow, summoned by instinct. Muscles coiled and eyes wild with desperate command. They fell into motion together, an uneasy rhythm, born of necessity. But soon the fray forced them deeper into the heart of the war tent, the thin canvassed walls trembling around them like brittle glass. Kaelin's cursed inability to touch anyone settled like a jagged weight between them, his need to reach out frustrated, raw. His jagged, burn-marked hand hovered inches from Serene's arm, trembling with a silent hunger he could neither explain nor quell. He was unable to bridge the divide, and the restraint, so unlike the iron will he was known for, made his storm-grey eyes darken with frustration. "Seren," he murmured hoarsely, voice rough like gravel. I want to protect you. But this curse, it won't let me." She met his gaze steadily, the scar along her cheek catching the muted light. "I know," she whispered, "but you already do." The wolf paced restlessly, anxious and alert, its dark eyes flicking between Kaelin and Seren. Seren closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the chaos vibrating outside the tent, the compressed air laden with fear and blood. Then a low, steady rhythm rose from her lips, a soft hum, hesitant but imbued with an instinctive calm. It was an old melody her mother had sung on storm-tossed nights, a tune woven into her memory like a protective charm. The sound rippled through the tense air, carrying with it a quiet warmth that began to ease the taut lines on Kaelin's face. The wolf's ears flinched, the pacing slowed. The beast's restless energy softened beneath the gentle cadence of Seren's voice. Kaylin's eyes, still shadowed with struggle, met hers, and for a fleeting second, the rigid walls of isolation that had cocooned them both began to crumble. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice trembling with a raw vulnerability she had never heard before. "From a life that tried to hold on to hope," Seren replied softly, "even when everything felt shattered." The storm in his eyes gave way, replaced by something fragile and uncertain, a flicker of trust taking root. The wolf settled at their feet, curling into a protective crescent, its breath slow and steady. It was a quiet surrender, a hint that even the wildest barriers could bend when met with unexpected gentleness. Kaylin's fingers twitched once more, aching to reach out. This time, Seren stepped closer, closing the space that had kept them apart. She reached out slowly, brushing a stray chestnut strand of hair behind her ear. The air between them tingled with unspoken promises and fragile hope. "I'm not so easy to let go," she said quietly, almost teasing. But the tremor beneath her words was real. The curse, the war, the weight of expectation, they all felt lighter in that moment. Kaylin's gaze flickered downward toward the faint spark that danced where their energies met but never touched. His breath was a low rumble, a surrender to something unspoken yet undeniable. "We'll break these chains," he vowed. Together. The war raged on outside, but inside the cramped tent, there was a stillness, a fragile peace that neither of them dared to name just yet. Beneath the restless watch of the wolf, the slow unraveling of fear had begun, and in that fragile warmth something impossible and raw was taking hold, woven from scars and curses, but born of a bond neither had expected, yet neither could deny. The air in the village was thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke, a reminder that the siege was drawing closer with every heartbeat. Seren's hands trembled as she knelt beside a cracked stone, her fingers brushing the rough surface. At first it was curiosity, a flicker of warmth, almost like a pulse beneath her skin. But then it grew, weaving through her veins like wildfire, until the pebble beneath her fingertips shimmered and then cracked into tiny embers dancing where it broke. She gasped, pulling back as if burned, though there was none of the searing pain she expected. Instead, something ancient and wild stirred within her, a current of power that the village had long feared, whispered about in the shadows, a force the elders cautioned could consume those who dared to wield it. Yet beneath the tent's canvas, beside her, Kaylin's gaze burned steady and unafraid. "Show me," he said, the rough voice that was always laced with command and something softer. Seren closed her eyes, breathing steady despite the pounding drum of fear. She forced her hands to stillness, then let the spark flare from her palms once more. This time, a small gust of wind spiraled upward, curling leaves into a miniature cyclone. She opened her eyes, emerald gaze, wide as she stared at the delicate storm curling between her fingers. You can channel the elements," Kaylin murmured, awe threading his voice. His beast, the wolf, rose alongside him, a low growl in its throat as it padded closer, its grey eyes shimmering with recognition, raw and unblinking. The wolf's fur bristled, as if sensing the truth Seren hadn't yet dared to accept, that her power was not a curse, but a weapon, a gift even, one that mirrored Kaylin's own struggle. But their quiet moment fractured suddenly as a sharp clatter echoed outside the tent, with splintering, hurried footsteps. Kaylin's body tensed. Instantly, the wolf, snarling muscles coiled like a spring about to snap. Seren's breath hitched, but she did not step back. The power thrumming beneath her skin was no longer a secret. It was a shield. Kaylin's voice was a sharp whisper. "Stay behind me." Yet she stood firm, the currents humming through her limbs, ready to obey whatever silent command she gave. The tent flap ripped open, and a man stumbled in, eyes darting wildly, hands clenching a knife slick with shadow. "Spy!" Kaylin growled, stepping between the intruder and Seren. But before the alpha could move, The man lunged, swift, desperate. Time slowed. Seren's hands flared, the air thickening instantly. With a gesture born of instinct more than control, a blast of wind knocked the man backward, tumbling him against the wooden frame of the tent. He cried out, eyes wide with shock. Kaelin's beast's growl deepened, teeth bared, but Seren raised a hand, the crackling energy curling like a serpent around her fingers. The man struggled to rise. "Why?" Seren demanded, stepping forward. Her voice steady, though snowflakes of doubt threatened to fracture her courage. "Who sent you?" The man's lips twisted in a grimace. "Not who sent me," he gasped. "Who you don't trust, who's already inside." The tent seemed to tilt, the breath of betrayal turning cold in the air. Kaelin's eyes narrowed as he looked at Seren, then to the prisoner. "Speak." The man coughed, the darkness in his voice, a shadow that stretched like a noose tightening around their throats. "The council. One of them is the real traitor, feeding the enemy intelligence. You're not fighting just the siege. You're fighting your own kin." Serene's heart hammered, the weight of the words anchoring into her chest. She glanced at Kaelin, whose gaze sharpened, the jagged scar on his hand flexing, as if craving the violence such lies deserved. But it was Seren who found the steel in her voice. "We need proof," she said, the elemental heat glowing anew beneath her skin. "I can find it." Kaelin nodded slowly, his storm-grey eyes never leaving hers. "Then we move fast." And we moved together. The wolf padded forward, steady and unerring, as they slipped from the tent, the night swallowing their small forms. The power swirling in Seren's hands was not just light or wind. It was survival, danger, and hope, all wrapped into one. Every step forward was a defiance against the fear that had shackled her for too long. Asterisk, 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 asterisk back, within the walls of their temporary refuge, Kaelin's voice was quiet but intense, carrying a vulnerability he wore like armor. The firelight flickered, throwing shadows that danced across his face. "You deserve to know the truth about the curse." Seren's gaze held him, steady, yet her soul recoiled at the invisible chains that bound him. "Tell me." Kaelin took a deep breath. The distant roar of war muted by the intimacy of the moment. "The moment I touch someone, my power surges beyond control. It becomes destructive, dangerous. I've burnt bridges, allies, even family because of it. To protect others, I had to isolate myself." His scarred hand flexed, the jagged burn a map of that painful history. "And you think I'm different?" Seren whispered, trepidation weaving through her words like a fragile thread. Kaelin's gaze softened, a flicker of something near hope shimmering there. "When you're near, when you touch me in spirit, not flesh, the storm simmers. Your presence calms the beast inside me. You're the balance I never thought I'd find." Seren's breath caught. The weight of that admission settled like thick stone in her chest. If his curse was a force of destruction, then what was she? A beacon, a weapon, or a liability? She pulled her hands into her lap, the elemental power humming softly beneath her skin, no longer just frightening, but also frighteningly real. The villagers had feared people like her, able to command the untamable forces of nature, and she understood why. She feared herself. "I'm scared." "Kaelin," she admitted, voice trembling with raw honesty. "If my power can save us, what happens if it can also destroy everything I'm trying to protect? I don't want to become another weapon, another curse like you." Kaelin moved closer, the wolf padding silently behind him, as if sensing the fragile fortress crumbling around them. "You're not a weapon, Seren. You're the fire that can burn away the darkness, but fire needs to be guided, not feared." His fingers hovered just inches from hers, the tension thick as fog. The curse held them apart, still, a chasm they had not crossed, but the promise in his eyes was undeniable. "I'll protect you," he vowed fiercely, voice low and unwavering, "not just as your king, but as the beast who refuses to lose you." The wolf growled softly. a solid presence anchoring the fragile thread between them. Seren met his gaze, the truth unmistakable. She was no longer the woman who had fled broken and beaten. This bond, painful, perilous, but undeniable, was forging her into something stronger. And underneath it all, beneath the roar of war and the weight of curses, the slow burn of healing had only just begun. The sky darkened as the siege deepened, a heavy cloak of smoke and ash settling over the village like a dying breath. The air grew thick with the scent of burning timber and scattered fear. The once distant drums of war thundered now at their doorstep, a relentless pulse pounding against the fragile walls that held them safe. Among the chaos, Seren moved with a quiet purpose, her emerald eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows, muscles taut and ready even as exhaustion clawed at her bones. Kaelin stood close, a steady presence amid the riot of panic and desperation. His storm-grey gaze never wavered from the village's defences, but beneath the armour of command, a flicker of something unspoken shone whenever it fell on her. The wolf's low growl was like a shadow tethering them both together, silent warning, fierce loyalty. Seren refused the sidelines. When the Council of Warriors debated their thinning options, she was there, her voice soft but steady.
"Let me help!"
"Let me use what I can." When raised eyebrows and cautious glances met her declaration, she met them without flinching. "I'm not just the village's burden. I'm a weapon too, and I will fight." Kaelin's eyes caught hers across the room as he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. The respect was uneasy, but real. Outside she found herself amid the soldiers, who whispered and watched. Some with admiration, others with disbelief. Yet none could deny the quiet defiance etched in every line of her stance, every command she gave when their numbers dwindled. The power inside her wasn't just wild, it was honed to a razor's edge by necessity, by the will to protect what little they had left. One moment slipped into the next, until there was only the steady pulse of the fight, a turbulent symphony of clashing steel and desperate cries, and in one breathless pause, their worlds narrowed down to the space between them. Kaelin reached out again, closer this time, his fingers a whisper from brushing hers, skin burning with the loss of connection. Their eyes locked, his full of longing and torment, hers wide with something raw and aching. A flicker of desire, so sharp, it sliced through the murk of fear and fatigue, but the moment tore apart before it could begin. A sudden ragged howl tore through the air, the beast's cry, piercing and primal shattering, the fragile thread holding them at bay. Kaelin's hand jerked back violently, the invisible chains of his curse ripping through the space like barbs. "Not yet," he breathed, voice rough and desperate, the wolf's growl curling through his chest like fire. Seren's heart thundered in her ears as the weight of what they could not yet share pressed down hard. The beast was a reminder of the price their bond exacted, a cruel sentinel standing guard between them. But beneath the pain, the fire sparked brighter still. The world fractured again before dawn, bleeding, betrayal before the sun had a chance to rise. The sickening crack of trust broken echoed sharper than any sword's edge, the sting of a knife thrust where none had worn to look. It was Alder, their ally, since the borders had first trembled. He had been a steady hand when hope faltered, a quiet shadow through endless nights. She trusted him. But trust, she learned, was a fragile thing with spider silk strands, easily cut, and even more easily slipped through the fingers held too tightly. Seren had glimpsed the truth too late, a dagger flashing in the dark, and pain searing through her side as she fell. Breath, ragged, shaking, the metallic taste of blood flooding her mouth. The world blurred in dizzying chaos as betrayal's cold hands dragged her down, alone and broken. The familiar terror pulled at her chest, fear and fury colliding beneath her skin. She lay there, the forest edge cold against her cheek, shadows swirling like ghosts around her, every breath a struggle, every heartbeat a hammer against her ribs. Hope felt like a cruel joke whispered on the wind. But beneath the shattered surface, something stirred. Heavy footsteps approached, silent, deliberate. The beast came first, dark fur blending with the shadows, eyes glinting with fierce assurance. Then Kaelin emerged, slower in motion, his storm-grey gaze sharp and unshaken. Relief flickered, raw and visceral. "You're alive," he said, voice hoarse. Disbelief threading through every word. Seren's gaze lifted cautiously, meeting his with equal parts exhaustion and stubborn will. "I was never going to give up." He knelt beside her, hands trembling as they hovered over her wound, careful fingers working gently despite the jagged burn that marred his right hand. Careful not to touch, yet desperate to comfort. The wolf pressed close, body radiating warmth through the cold night, a living shield against the darkness creeping in from all sides. For the first time, isolation gnawed at Serenot. The exile she had once fled, but the lonely space carved by fear and the weight of her own fractured power. Blood dripping from torn clothes, breath shallow, pain like a tempest raging beneath her skin. She pushed through the haze. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice fragile but fierce. "Not just of them, of me." Kaelin's eyes softened, fierce and protective. "Pran, not anymore." In the days that followed, the village hunkered down beneath the oppressive shadow of siege, wounded and raw. But the distance between them, the curse that had kept their touches ghostly and fleeting, seemed to evaporate in the charged silence. In isolation, the raw swell of her power surged unchecked. Energy pulsed beneath her skin, a river breaking through its dam. Tumultuous, wild, desperate for control. She curled into herself, learning to ride the swell rather than drown beneath it, the pain of rejection and betrayal settling into a volatile fuel. Her emerald eyes blazed like smouldering coals, the faint scar along her cheek a testament to the battles both outside and within. She could feel the power grow, a living thing clawing to be more than just destruction, yearning to protect, to rebuild. Kaelin's presence hovered nearby, vigilant and steady, yet respectful of the fragile boundaries she set. He never pressed, never demanded, but their connection was a tether strong enough to draw her back whenever the storm threatened to consume her. One evening, when the sun bled crimson over the horizon, he spoke quietly, voice low, and filled with raw honesty. "Your power is a gift, Seren, not just to fight, but to heal, to make whole the broken pieces. You are more than the scars you carry." She looked at him then, not as the Alpha King, bound by curse and beast, but as the man who had found her shattered and refused to let her go. A fragile hope bloomed in that moment, something delicate but tenacious. "I'm not just surviving anymore," she whispered, the words unfamiliar yet liberating. "I'm becoming something worth fighting for." Kaelin's hand hovered close once more, this time not in longing, but in promise. The curse still bristled between them like a wall of invisible thorns, but neither retreated. The beast growled softly, his presence a constant raw reminder of the cost, and the fierce, unyielding bond that would not break. Together, broken but unbowed, they faced the gathering storm, their slow-burning alliance forged in fire and blood. Amid the chaos, in the spaces between pain and fear, they began to heal, not as king and outcast, but as two halves of a whole, fiercely intertwined and unshakably bound. Kaelin stood before the towering council chamber, the great hall thrumming with the discord of the nobility's murmurs. Silver banners hung heavy with dust and disuse, witnesses to centuries of power, and law now tainted by their verdict against Seren. He looked out at the gathered faces, proud, rigid, unwilling to bend. Their judgment had been harsh, final, branding her as unworthy, a traitor, a pawn, a threat not only to the realm, but to their fragile order. The air thickened as Kalen strode forward, silence blossoming around him like a blade's edge. His storm-grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, swept over the assembly. The jagged burn mark on his right hand clenched unconsciously, the beast beneath his skin stirring with a feral growl that rumbled low through the hall's quiet. A word, Kalen's voice cut through the stillness, unwavering, commanding. This tribunal has spoken with certainty, but certainty does not mean truth. His gaze locked onto the faces of those who had condemned her, their smugness withering under the weight of his challenge. Saren's intentions were never treasonous. You judged her from fear, from lies spun to protect your own thrones, but I, his voice dropped lower, and something primeval clawed from within him. A guttural growl, a sound, neither fully man nor fully beast, that echoed off the stone walls and seized the breath from every throat. The court froze. The great wolf's declaration wasn't just a show of force, it was a mark. The unbroken